In this video, I'm going to show you how I made a coffee table from the offcut from my kitchen island project. This piece of wood is a 3-inch thick piece of Parota that was cut in Costa Rica. I bought the smallest slab the warehouse had, and it was still too big for what I needed, so I ended up having to cut about 2.5 to 3 feet off of it. The first step in any of these big projects that I've done is to flatten the whole thing using a router sled. So I built these saw ponies with these 2x6s for rails, basically just setting everything up, making sure it's level. And then I used a sled that I built to flatten the whole top side of the slab. The bit I'm using in the router is an 1 3/4 bit that I found on Amazon. So I'm basically just taking small passes a little bit at a time, maybe an 1/8 inch deep, until the whole piece is flat. Now this one was pretty flat to begin with, so I think I only had to do 1 or 2 passes. But if it's not flat, you'll see kind of wear marks where you're hitting and missing. And you go across back and forth until you're basically hitting the whole thing with the router. After that is sanding. That router, it doesn't get it perfectly flat. It's not a CNC, so there's a lot of sanding. Once I get the top pretty much squared away, at least roughly, I flip it over and roughly sand the bottom. Now I don't flatten the entire bottom, and you'll see why in a little bit. So right now I'm just going over it with the belt sander. Now I do have a live edge on one part of the table, and I decided I wanted to give a faux live edge to the rest of it. This is the same kind of thing I did with my kitchen counter. I just have a carving disc on the grinder and just going at it. Then here I'm just trying to figure out about where I want the legs. Gonna make sure they're all square to each other, but obviously the slab doesn't have a square edge on it anymore, so kind of just eyeballing it. Then I'll put the legs in temporarily just to see if I like where they're at. You can see the mark. I didn't like where they were marked originally, so I moved them all in a little bit. So this is kind of the first shot of a rough idea of what the table's going to look like. Now I'm just going over everything with the palm sander, basically just running up through the grits before I start flipping it over to work on the bottom again. So here I'm setting this router sled back up so I can work on the bottom. Now like I said before, I don't flatten the entire bottom. I'm just going to be flattening out those marked areas where the legs are going to go. So I switched to a 1/2 inch plunge cutting bit, and once I set my depth, all of these little pockets I make are going to be the same distance from the top of the table. So they'll all be level with the top of the table. Now this was tricky because the sled's kind of in the way of what I'm cutting, so it took a while, but it was probably the best way I could do it. Now once I have it roughed out with the router, I'll come back in with a chisel and clean up the edges, take all the round corners out, and work back to the line. Now these don't have to be perfect because they are on the bottom, but I am trying to at least make them close. So from the bottom it looks like the pockets are different sizes, but because everything is referenced from the router sled setup, they're all the same level, if that makes sense. So now that we've got that pretty much done, it's just on to sanding, working up through the grits until I get to maybe 220, and then I'm using Waterlox finish. The Waterlox gives this Parota a really nice color when it's finished. Now I'm constantly struggling with getting dust and dog hair and stuff in the finish anytime I do a project. This is, you could see me picking out a few pieces there. Now I don't have a branding iron or anything yet, so this is kind of how I've been marking my stuff lately. So now the bottom's basically done now, so putting the legs on, and I'll flip it over so we can start the final finish process on the top. Now I think Waterlox recommends you use a wool brush or a wool pad to apply it. I hadn't tried that. The roller seems to work, but it is a little finicky trying to make sure you don't get roller marks in it. So in between coats I'll go over it with, I think this is just 4/0 steel wool. Get any dust bits out of there, any dog hair that might have landed in there. And then you'll see I kind of very gently go back over it with the next coat, trying not to get any roller marks in there, and just very minimal pressure, just pushing the finish around. You can see the lines of bubbles in between the rollers strokes there. So you kind of have to carefully go back over it to make sure you get all that stuff out before it dries too much. Then one last coat. I think I've been doing 3 to 4 coats with this stuff, and it's been working pretty well. This finish is pretty durable too. I think it'll work, be nice for a coffee table. Now last step is just to load it up and take it to its new home. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I appreciate you watching.